Michigan, in the Midwest, to take over those industries, run them themselves, run them profitably, and produce what is needed. In fact, what you observe in the United States today is almost surreal. I mean, the country's infrastructure is terrible. I mean, compare, say, U.S. railroads to European, not British, but the continental railroads. And one thing that's very seriously needed because of the energy crisis, the climate crisis, the infrastructure crisis, is high-speed transit. Now, the transportation secretary, Obama's transportation secretary, is in Europe trying to use federal stimulus money to obtain for contracts with, say, Spanish companies to produce high-speed rail technology and equipment for the United States. It's outlandish. At the same time, they're dismantling the industrial capacity at home, which could very well produce it. Well, you know, it's not necessary to just sit and watch that happen any more than it was necessary for Bolivian peasants to watch the World Bank privatize water so that some economists could be happy and Bechtel company could make plenty of money, but they wouldn't have water to drink. They kicked the company out and took the system over themselves. And that can be done here.
What's your key message to people in terms of how they can solve these problems, how they can, I suppose, take matters into their own hands?
In this particular case, workers and communities can take over the industrial facilities that are being dismantled and just run them themselves. They'll need popular support for that, and maybe federal support too, but it doesn't have to be, it probably wouldn't even be a fraction of what's being given away to big bankers. Those are all feasible tasks. And if the populist anger goes in that direction, and many similar things elsewhere, it could be meaningful. On the other hand, if it turns into right-wing rage, let's Sarah Palin, Rush Limbaugh style rage, it could be extremely dangerous. And it's the tasks of serious organizers and activists to try to help direct these understandable currents into constructive directions, rather than those that might have very ominous consequences. And I presume similar things can be said about Ireland in different circumstances. It's the same is true on many other things. So take say healthcare. I mean, the main issue that Congress has been struggling with for the last months is a healthcare bill. U.S. healthcare system is a complete scandal. It has about twice the per capita costs of other industrial societies. It has some of the worst outcomes. 50 million people have no insurance at all. And the reason is, it is also the only healthcare system in the industrial world that's based on essentially unregulated private insurance companies. Well, and a powerful drug industry. This is the only country in the world that I know of where the government is barred by law from negotiating drug prices with the big pharmaceutical industries. Well, you know, when you have an unregulated insurance system, unregulated huge pharmaceutical industry, which is free to do what it wants, and of course benefits from enormous government support in research and development, and monopoly pricing rights, and so on. So it's not a free market system. As long as you have that, yeah, you're going to have extremely expensive and wasteful and inefficient healthcare system. Now, the public has views on this. For years, decades, the public has been in favor of some sort of a national healthcare system. Well, that's not even on the agenda. Private financial institutions and the pharmaceutical industry won't permit it. and they basically own Congress and the White House, so they get their way. Now, there was an attempt in the current bills to deal with the public concern by allowing what was called a public option. That is, among the options that would be available for health care would be a public one, sort of like Medicare, the program for the elderly. And there was also an option to allow buy-in to Medicare. So instead of at 65, you could buy in at 55. The public was pretty strongly, still is strongly in favor of those choices. You look at the polls, it's kind of like 2 to 1. They're not going to be enacted because of the power of the insurance companies and the financial institutions. And are the private insurance companies going to be regulated? Well, the latest poll just came out about 2 days ago, and by a large margin, people have an opinion about it and think something should be done. By a large margin in favor of regulation. It's not going to happen. In fact, what you read in the press is that the public is opposed to the health care reform. That's true, because they wanted to go farther, not because they don't want it to happen. But the power of private capital is so extraordinary, and Congress and the White House are so subordinate to it, that we're going to end up with, at best, some minor improvement over a system which is so fiscally out of control that it's practically destroyed the budget. Well, is that those are signs of serious failures of democracy and of organizing and of activism, and that has to be dealt with. And you see that everywhere. When it takes, say, global warming, well, if nothing is done about that, nothing serious, it's going to be maybe not a death knell for the species, but it's going to lead to a world of, it'll lead to a catastrophe sooner or later. The energy industries in the United States are strongly opposed to doing anything about it because it'll cut into their short-term profits. And they have launched a huge propaganda campaign, which the media are fairly receptive to try to convince the public that it's not a significant issue. And that has been successful. In the past year, if you look at polls, the proportion of people who think that global warming is a serious problem has dropped sharply. In fact, it has dropped to the point where barely a third of the population thinks that human activity has an effect on global warming. Well, that's a great victory for the energy corporations. It's a huge defeat for our grandchildren. We're going to have to live with the consequences of this. And here's a task where organizers and activists have their work cut out for them on an issue that's basically one of species survival.
Can they do it?
We don't know. But it's not going to happen by itself. And there are many other issues.
Thank you very much.